of who they slept with. They were just the people I loved.
James Dean's life was cut tragically short, but his legend only grew after his death. For decades, rumors and myths surrounded his final days, stories of recklessness, mystery, and what really happened before that fatal crash. Now, after years of silence, one of Dean's closest friends has finally come forward to speak the truth. His words reveal a side of James Dean the public never saw. You have to understand, the truth about Jimmy isn't some grand secret locked away in a vault. It's not a single sentence that changes everything. It's more like a photograph that's been slowly coming into focus for decades. For years, all we had was this blurry image of a rebel in a red jacket, a cigarette hanging from his lips, the cool, quiet type who didn't need anyone. That was the myth. That was the product Hollywood sold. And boy, did people buy it. But that wasn't the truth. The real truth is infinitely more fragile, more complicated, and more tragic. The truth is what I saw, what his real friends saw, in the quiet moments between the camera flashes. It's the story of a boy who never stopped looking for a home, a boy whose rebellion wasn't against society, but against a deep, hollowing pain that started when he was just 9 years old. To understand why he got into that silver Porsche on that last day, you don't start in Hollywood, you have to go back. Back to the fields of Indiana. He was born James Byron Dean in Marion, Indiana, in the thick of the Great Depression. But his first few years weren't the hard-scrabble farm life you might picture. His father, Winton, was a dental technician, and he moved the family out to Santa Monica, California, when Jimmy was a toddler. Those early California years were the anchor of his entire life, the one period of pure, uncomplicated happiness he would ever know. And the center of that happiness was his mother, Mildred Wilson Dean. Mildred wasn't just a mother, she was his whole world. She was the one who saw the spark in him, this sensitive, artistic soul. She enrolled him in tap dance classes. She encouraged his passion for sculpture and art. Together they would put on little puppet shows in a miniature theater she helped him build. She taught him to play the violin. Think about that for a second. The man who would become the icon of tough, masculine rebellion started out playing the violin taught by his mother. She was his first and most important audience. He adored her, and she adored him. They had a bond that was almost symbiotic, a secret world of art and creativity that existed just for the two of them. Winton, his father, was a more distant figure. Not a bad man by most accounts, but a product of his time, reserved, practical, and perhaps a bit bewildered by his intensely emotional and artistic son. The connection just wasn't there. All of Jimmy's emotional energy, all his need for love and approval was directed at Mildred. And then, when Jimmy was 9 years old, the world fell apart. Mildred grew sick. It was uterine cancer, swift and brutal. Jimmy would spend hours lying in bed with her, trying to comfort her, trying to will her back to health with the sheer force of his love. He watched her waste away. He watched her die. Imagine being 9 years old and the sun of your universe simply goes out. It wasn't just grief. It was annihilation. It was the ultimate abandonment. The second blow came almost immediately. Winton, now a single father struggling to cope with his own grief and the responsibility of raising a son he didn't quite understand, made a decision that would echo through the rest of Jimmy's life. He decided he couldn't care for him, so he put his 9-year-old son, fresh from watching his mother die, on a train. He sent him back to Fairmount, Indiana to be raised by his sister and her husband, Hortense and Marcus Winslow. The train ride itself has become part of the legend. Little Jimmy, sitting alone with his mother's casket in the baggage car for part of the journey. We don't know if that's entirely true, but it might as well be. Emotionally, he was right there in that dark, cold car with everything he had ever loved. He had lost his mother to death, and his father to what felt to him like indifference. He arrived in Fairmount an orphan in spirit, if not in fact. The Winslows were good people. They were kind, salt-of-the-earth farmers who gave him a stable home. They loved him, but they couldn't replace what he had lost. They couldn't fill the void left by Mildred. Fairmount was a world away from the arts and culture of Santa Monica. It was a world of chores, church, and high school basketball. Jimmy tried to fit in. He was a decent athlete, played on the baseball and basketball teams. He was a star on the debate team. But he was always different. He was the California kid with a grief he couldn't articulate and an artistic sensibility that had no outlet. His lifeline came from an unlikely source, a local Methodist pastor named Reverend James DeWeerd. DeWeerd was a dramatic, worldly figure for a small Indiana town. He'd traveled, he was interested in theater and literature, and he saw that same spark in Jimmy that Mildred had. He became Jimmy's mentor. He coached him in public speaking, gave him books to read, and introduced him to the thrill of performance through dramatic readings for church. He took Jimmy to the Indianapolis 500, igniting a passion for racing that would later consume him. DeWeerd filled a paternal vacuum, but it was a complicated relationship. Biographers have written about the murkiness of it, the potential for exploitation. DeWeerd was a powerful influence, shaping Jimmy's mind and ambitions, but also introducing him to a world of adult complexities he may not have been ready for. What is certain is that DeWeerd nurtured the actor in him. He gave Jimmy a stage, and on that stage, Jimmy found a way to let the feelings out. He could be someone else, and in being someone else, he could finally, safely, be himself. All the confusion, the anger, the longing for his mother, he could pour it all into a performance. Acting wasn't a career choice for him. It was a psychological necessity. It was a way to survive. After graduating from high school, he made the choice to leave Indiana for good. He packed his bags and headed back to California, ostensibly to study law at Santa Monica College, which was his father's wish. Winton had since remarried and was still living there. Jimmy moved in with him and his stepmother, but the reunion was strained. The old distance was still there, now compounded by years of separation and unspoken resentment. Jimmy had no interest in law. He quickly transferred to UCLA and changed his major to drama. This was the final break. When Winton found out, he was furious. He saw acting as an unstable, even dishonorable profession. They had a massive argument, and Jimmy moved out. He was on his own now, truly, abandoned for a second time by his father, this time for choosing the one thing that made him feel alive. Those next couple of years were a struggle. The classic story of a young, hungry actor. He got a job as a parking lot attendant at CBS Studios, hoping to be discovered. He'd race his motorcycle through the Hollywood Hills, a blur of restless energy. He got a few tiny parts, an uncredited line in a war film, a role in a Pepsi commercial where he sings and dances around a jukebox. Watching it now is surreal. There he is, the future icon of angst, all smiles and wholesome energy, a perfect image of the 1950s conformity he would later help to destroy. He was trying to play the game, but he wasn't built for it. The Hollywood studio system of the early 50s wanted polished, clean-cut stars. They wanted Tab Hunter and Rock Hudson. They didn't know what to do with this brooding, unpredictable kid who seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was too raw, too real. Frustrated, he took the advice of friends and made the move that would define his career. He went to New York City. New York, in the early 1950s, was the undisputed center of serious American theater. And at the heart of that world was a place that was more like a church than a school, the Actors Studio. Presided over by the legendary Lee Strasberg, the studio was the temple of a new kind of acting, a revolutionary technique known simply as the method. The method was based on the teachings of the Russian director Konstantin Stanislavski. The core idea was that an actor shouldn't just pretend to feel an emotion. They should use their own memories and experiences to actually conjure that emotion inside themselves. It was about psychological realism. For an actor like Jimmy, who was a walking bundle of unresolved emotional trauma, this wasn't just a technique. It was a key unlocking his own soul. His grief over his mother, his feelings of abandonment by his father, these weren't things to be hidden anymore. They were his tools. He could use them. He could channel all that pain into his art. He auditioned for the Actors Studio, and on his second try was accepted. It was an exclusive club, and getting in was a massive validation. He was in the same room as people like Marlon Brando, Julie Harris, and Carl Malden. But even there he was an outsider. He was intensely shy and insecure. He would sit in the back, observing, rarely speaking. He audited classes more than he participated. Elia Kazan, the famed director and co-founder of the studio, remembered him as this strange, silent figure hunched in a corner. But when he did perform, it was electric. He would do scenes that left people stunned, not because they were technically perfect, but because they were terrifyingly real. He wasn't acting, he was bleeding. During this time in New York, he lived the life of a struggling artist. He slept on friends' couches, took odd jobs, and scraped by. He was famously unkempt, often wearing the same dirty t-shirt for days. But he was also building a reputation. He started getting roles in the burgeoning world of live television, appearing in dozens of dramas on shows like Kraft Television Theater and Studio One. These were his training ground, where he honed his craft in front of millions. This was also the period where the complexities of his personal life became even more pronounced. Jimmy craved love and affection with a desperate intensity, and he sought it from both men and women. His first serious relationship in New York was with a dancer named Liz Sheridan. It was a sweet, conventional romance, but his life was far from conventional. His closest friend and roommate at the time was William Bast, a fellow aspiring writer and actor. In his biography, Bast later wrote about the physical, sexual nature of their relationship. Jimmy also fell under the sway of another older, powerful man, a television director named Rogers Brackett, who became his mentor and, for a time, his lover. He provided Jimmy with career guidance and a place to live, in a dynamic that echoed his earlier relationship with Reverend DeWeird. Then came Pier Angeli. She was a beautiful, delicate Italian actress, and for a brief, intense period, they were Hollywood's tragic golden couple. They met while he was filming his first major movie. They fell deeply in love. He called her his other half. For Jimmy, it seemed like he had finally found a love that was pure and all-encompassing, like the love he'd lost with his mother. But it was doomed. Pierre's mother disapproved of Jimmy. He wasn't Catholic. He was moody and unconventional. He rode motorcycles too fast. She pressured Pierre to break it off and marry the singer Vic Damone, a more suitable match. The story goes that on the day of her wedding, Jimmy sat on his motorcycle across the street from the church, revving the engine, a heartbroken outcast, watching his dreams slip away. Whether that's true or not, the heartbreak was real. Pierre would later say that Jimmy was the only man she ever truly loved. Her own life ended tragically in suicide years later. For Jimmy, it was yet another profound abandonment. Every time he reached for love, it was snatched away. This simmering pot of talent, ambition, and personal anguish was exactly what director Elia Kazan was looking for. Kazan was casting his epic film adaptation of John Steinbeck's novel East of Eden. The story is a retelling of the biblical story of Cain and Abel, centered on two brothers vying for the love of their stern, pious father. The role of Cal Trask was one of the most complex young characters in modern literature, moody, insecure, desperate for affection, and prone to explosive flashes of emotion. Kazan had considered Marlon Brando, but Brando was too old. He needed someone younger, someone who didn't have to act the part, but who was the part. A friend suggested he meet this kid from the actor's studio, James Dean. Kazan met Jimmy and knew instantly. He later wrote, "When I introduced him to Steinbeck, Steinbeck said, 'My God, he is Cal.' The casting was perfect. Too perfect, maybe." The film's central conflict is Cal's tortured relationship with his father, played by the veteran stage actor Raymond Massey. Massey was an old-school professional. He believed in hitting your marks, saying your lines as written, and maintaining a professional distance. He was, in a way, a stand-in for Jimmy's own distant father. Jimmy, on the other hand, was all method. He would antagonize Massey off-camera to provoke a genuine reaction on camera. He would change his lines, improvise actions, anything to get to the emotional truth of the scene. Massey hated it. He saw it as unprofessional and disrespectful. The tension culminated in the film's most powerful scene. Cal has just made a fortune in a business venture, and he tries to give the money to his father as a gift, a desperate attempt to buy his love. In the script, the father rejects the money, saying it was earned. Something else happened. After Massey, as the father, rejects him, Jimmy didn't just walk away. He lunged forward and grabbed Massey, embracing him, sobbing uncontrollably into his chest. He wasn't just Cal Trask anymore. He was Jimmy Dean, the 9-year-old boy on the train platform, begging his father not to send him away. The raw, agonizing pain was so real that it transcended acting. Massey was shocked. The other actors were stunned into silence. Kazan kept the cameras rolling. That's the take you see in the movie. It's one of the most authentic moments of anguish ever put on film, because it wasn't a performance. It was a confession. East of Eden was released in the spring of 1955. Jimmy, who had always been so insecure, refused to go to the premiere. He thought he was terrible in it. The world disagreed. He became an overnight sensation. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor, the first actor in history to receive a posthumous nomination for that category, as we would later find out. He was on the cover of magazines. He was the most talked-about new star in the world. But the fame didn't fix him. It just made things worse. He was intensely private, and now he was public property. He hated the interviews, the phony Hollywood parties, the demands of the studio. He felt like a commodity, a product to be sold. His rebellion grew more pronounced. He would show up to formal events in dirty jeans. He would give sarcastic one-word answers to reporters. It wasn't an act. It was a defense mechanism. He was building a wall around that fragile boy from Fairmount. His next film would cement that wall into an icon. The film was Rebel Without a Cause. If East of Eden was about the search for a father's love, Rebel was about the cry of a generation that felt misunderstood by their parents' world. The role of Jim Stark, the new kid in town who was torn apart by his bickering, ineffectual parents, was another perfect fit. The film opens with him drunk, lying in the street, playing with a toy monkey. I'm fine, he mumbles, a line that could have been his personal mantra. The most famous scene, the one that defines the entire film and for many Jimmy himself, takes place at the police station. After getting into a fight, Jim is brought in and his parents are called. He tries to explain himself, to make them understand the pressures he's under, the need to stand up for himself in a new school, but they don't get it. They bicker over his head. His mother worried about appearances, his father weak and unable to offer any real guidance. Finally, Jim explodes. He screams that now iconic line, "You're tearing me apart!" It's a howl of pure adolescent rage and frustration, and like the scene with Raymond Massey, it felt completely real. He wasn't Jim Stark screaming at his movie parents. He was James Dean screaming at a world that had consistently failed him. A world that took his mother and gave him a father who couldn't connect. On the set of Rebel, he created his own little family with his co-stars, Natalie Wood and Sal Mineo. They were the three lonely, troubled kids at the center of the film, and they bonded deeply. He was protective of them, especially Sal Mineo, who played the adoring, vulnerable Plato. Mineo, who was struggling with his own sexuality, idolized Jimmy. He later said that in the scene where Plato rests his head on Jim's shoulder, he was really feeling that affection for Jimmy himself. Jimmy, Natalie, and Sal. They were the film's tragic trio, and in a chilling piece of foreshadowing, all three would die young and violently. Rebel Without a Cause was a cultural phenomenon. It gave a voice to the restless, burgeoning youth culture of the 1950s. Teenagers finally saw someone on screen who looked and felt like them. The red windbreaker he wore became an instant uniform for rebellion. The film's themes of alienation and the search for an authentic identity were Jimmy's own themes, now writ large on the silver screen. He had become a symbol. At the same time, his passion for motor racing was becoming an obsession. It was the one place where he felt completely in control. The world of Hollywood was fake, but the physics of a hairpin turn at 100 miles per hour were undeniably real. There was no pretense in racing. It was pure skill, pure nerve, pure focus. It was a way to channel his restless energy, his death-defying streak. He bought a series of sports cars, starting with a Porsche Speedster, and he was good. He won several amateur races. The studio, Warner Brothers, was terrified. They had a multi-million-dollar star risking his life every weekend. They put a clause in his contract forbidding him from racing while he was filming. His third and final film was Giant, another epic on the scale of East of Eden. He was the third lead, after established superstars Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor. He played Jet Rink, a poor, surly ranch hand who strikes oil and becomes an impossibly wealthy, lonely, and dissipated tycoon. It was an incredible acting challenge, requiring him to age decades over the course of the film. His relationship with the director, George Stevens, was contentious. Stevens was a meticulous, classical director, polar opposite of Elia Kazan. He wanted every shot planned, every line delivered exactly as rehearsed. He and Jimmy clashed constantly, but Jimmy found a deep and lasting friendship with Elizabeth Taylor. She was one of the few people who seemed to see past the difficult exterior to the vulnerable person inside. They would stay up late at night in her hotel room, talking for hours. She said he would tell her about his mother, about his fears, about his insomnia. He trusted her. He felt a connection with her, another child star who had grown up in the strange, artificial world of Hollywood. Rock Hudson, on the other hand, was more distant. Hudson was a closeted gay man carefully cultivating an image of rugged masculinity, and he was likely wary of Jimmy's open emotionality and androgynous appeal. For his final scene in Giant, Jimmy had to play Jet Rink as a drunken, incoherent old man, delivering a rambling, pathetic speech at a banquet in his own honor. To prepare, he actually got drunk. The words were slurred and almost impossible to understand. The take was unusable for the film's soundtrack. Later, after Jimmy's death, George Stevens had to have another actor overdub the lines. But if you watch the footage, the physical performance is devastating. He captured the hollow emptiness of a man who got everything he ever wanted and found it meant nothing. It was his last and perhaps most prophetic performance. He had played the lost boy in Eden, the misunderstood teen in Rebel, and now the lonely wreck in Giant. It was the complete, tragic arc of a life. As soon as filming on Giant was complete, the studio's racing ban was lifted. Jimmy was free. He immediately went out and bought the car that would become his coffin. It was a Porsche 550 Spyder, a tiny, lightweight, and fearsomely fast German race car. It was a machine built for one purpose: to win. It was notoriously difficult to handle, a car for experts only. He had his friend, the customizer George Barris, paint the number 130 on the hood and the name Little Bastard on the rear. Little Bastard was a nickname Jack Warner, the head of the studio, had supposedly called him. By painting it on his car, Jimmy was reclaiming the insult, wearing it as a badge of honor. The car seemed to have a dark aura around it from the start. His friend, the actor Alec Guinness, the future Obi-Wan Kenobi, saw the car outside a restaurant just a week before the accident. He had a strange premonition. As he later told it, he said to Jimmy, "Please do not get in that car. If you do, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." Jimmy just laughed it off. Several other friends, including Pier Angeli's own twin sister, expressed a deep sense of dread about the car. But Jimmy was exhilarated. This car was the ultimate expression of his identity: fast, dangerous, and defiant. On September 30th, 1955, he was scheduled to drive the Spyder in a race in Salinas, California. He had originally planned to tow the car there, but at the last minute, his mechanic, a German man named Rolf Wutherich, suggested he drive it instead. It would give him a chance to get a feel for the car, to break it in, with a couple of friends following behind in a station wagon. Photographer Sanford Roth was with them, taking pictures for a magazine story. Some of the last photos of James Dean alive show him gassing up the Porsche, smiling, looking forward to the race. It was a beautiful, clear California day. They were making good time, maybe too good. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, on the long, straight stretch of road near Bakersfield, a highway patrolman pulled them over and gave Jimmy a ticket for speeding. He was doing 65 in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. He was warned to slow down. An hour or two later, they made one last stop at a little roadside diner called Blackwell's Corner. Jimmy bought an apple and a Coca-Cola. He stretched his legs, chatted with his friends. He was just hours away from the racetrack. They got back on the road, heading west on Route 466. The sun was beginning to set, casting a long, golden glare across the landscape. Rolf was in the passenger seat. Jimmy was behind the wheel. Up ahead, a young Cal Poly student named Donald Turnipseed was driving home in his 1950 Ford Tudor sedan. The Ford was a big, heavy piece of American iron. The Porsche was a tiny, 2,000-pound silver projectile. Turnipseed was heading east, and he needed to make a left turn onto Route 41. The intersection is infamous now. It sits in a wide, flat valley. You can see for miles, but in the fading light of that particular evening, things can play tricks on your eyes. Turnipseed later said he saw the little silver car coming, but he thought he had plenty of time to make his turn. He misjudged its speed. It was moving much faster than he thought. He began to make his left turn, pulling directly into the path of the oncoming Porsche. In the passenger seat, Rolf Wutherich reportedly screamed at Jimmy to slow down. Jimmy's supposed last words were, "That guy's gotta stop. He'll see us." But Turnipseed didn't stop. He was committed to the turn. At 5:45 p.m., the two cars met. There was no time for Jimmy to swerve. The lightweight Spyder slammed almost head-on into the driver's side of the much heavier Ford. The impact was catastrophic. Little Porsche crumpled like an aluminum can, spinning off the road and landing in a ditch. The Ford was sent spinning in the other direction. Donald Turnipseed, the student, suffered only minor injuries. He was dazed but able to get out of his car. Rolf Wutherick was thrown clear from the Porsche and suffered a broken jaw and other serious injuries, but he would survive. Jimmy was trapped in the driver's seat, his body mangled, his neck broken. A woman who was a nurse happened to be in a car right behind them. She rushed to the wreckage. She checked for a pulse. There was a very faint one, she said, but he was already gone. By the time the ambulance arrived at the hospital in Paso Robles a half-hour later, the news spread slowly at first, then like wildfire. Warner Brothers released a statement. Newspapers printed the shocking headlines, but for the public, he wasn't really dead yet. East of Eden was his only film that had been released. Rebel Without a Cause was set to premiere just a few weeks later. So, in a strange and ghoulish twist of fate, as the world was mourning his death, his fame was just beginning to explode. Audiences flocked to see Rebel, and they didn't just see a movie. They saw a ghost. They saw a young man raging against the very mortality that had just claimed him. When Giant was released the following year, the cycle repeated. His on-screen death as the lonely Jet Rink felt eerily prescient. He became more famous in death than he ever was in life. He became a myth, a blank screen onto which millions of people projected their own feelings of rebellion, loneliness, and desire. A bizarre death cult sprang up. Thousands of fan letters a week arrived at the studio, many refusing to believe he was dead. Some claimed he was horribly disfigured and living in secret in a hospital. The wreckage of the little bastard was sold to George Barris, who loaned it out for safety exhibits. A series of strange and tragic accidents befell people who handled parts of the car, creating the legend of the cursed Porsche. The car itself eventually vanished while being transported and has never been seen again, adding another layer to the mystery. And this is where we get back to the truth, the friend's truth. The myth is compelling. The cool rebel, the cursed car, the live fast, die young cliché. It's a great story, but it obscures the real person. It papers over the real pain. The truth is, Jimmy wasn't a rebel without a cause. His cause was painfully clear to anyone who really knew him. His cause was a desperate, lifelong search for the love and security that was stolen from him at age 9. His rebellion wasn't against rules or conformity. It was a rebellion against emotional dishonesty. He couldn't stand phoniness in Hollywood or in life because he was pathologically, compulsively authentic. The method wasn't just an acting technique for him. It was the only way he knew how to be. He put his raw, wounded self on display for the world to see, and the world called it genius. And it was, but it came at a tremendous cost. Think about his 3 films. They aren't just movies. They are a trilogy about his own life. In East of Eden, he is the abandoned son, literally begging his father for love. That wasn't Cal Trask. That was Jimmy Dean. In Rebel Without a Cause, he is the misunderstood adolescent, screaming at his parents for tearing him apart. That wasn't Jim Stark. That was Jimmy Dean. And in Giant, he is the lonely outsider who gains the whole world but ends up drunk and alone, having lost his soul. That wasn't just Jet Rink. That was the future Jimmy Dean saw for himself if he continued down that path. He gave everything to those roles. He left his own blood on the screen, and when it was over, there was nothing left. The fame brought him no peace. The money brought him no happiness. The love he found was always conditional, always fleeting. So he turned to the one thing that gave him a feeling of control, of pure, unadulterated reality: racing. The speed was an anesthetic. On the road, in that car, he didn't have to think about his mother. He didn't have to think about his father, or Pierre Angeli, or the phoniness of it all. He just had to focus on the next turn. Was his death an accident? Yes, in the literal sense. A young man made a left turn at the wrong moment. But in a deeper sense, it felt like an inevitability. It was the final scene in a movie he had been writing his whole life. A life lived at such a fever pitch of emotional intensity could not simply coast to a quiet old age. He was a supernova. He was meant to burn brilliantly and then disappear. The truth his friend finally spoke wasn't a secret whispered on a deathbed. It's a truth that's been hiding in plain sight for over half a century. It's right there, in his eyes, in every frame of film he ever shot. The truth is that the coolest rebel of the 20th century was, in reality, one of its most fragile and heartbroken boys. His legacy isn't the red jacket or the cigarette. It's the gut-wrenching vulnerability he dared to show the world. He showed us that behind every rebel, there's a cause, and his cause was love. The search for it, the pain of its absence, and the beautiful, tragic art he created from that empty space. He wasn't driving toward a racetrack on that final day. He was driving toward the only ending that made sense for a story that began with a boy losing his whole world on a lonely train ride through the heart of America. He was, in the end, just trying to get home. The truth shared by James Dean's friend gives us a deeper, more personal glimpse into the life of a star who burned too bright, too fast. Beyond the headlines and Hollywood legends, there was a young man searching for meaning, battling fears, and chasing something just out of reach. And now, thanks to this long-awaited confession, the world can finally understand the man behind the myth.